Welcome back, Canonites. As I'm sure most of you know, this morning we got the first video in a new series called UNSC Archives, which will detail the history of Mjolnir development while advertising for Halo Infinite. Like the Step Inside trailer from 2019, the UNSC Archives series again seems to be promoting the tagline Become, as in we, the player, are becoming the Master Chief. 343 is leaning heavily into the traditional Chief is a vessel for marketing, and while I personally don't agree with that mindset, we've already seen that the game isn't ditching the Chief is his own character angle. So, 343 are seemingly trying to have their cake and eat it too, and if they can stick the landing, all the more power to them. But enough meta-analysis, y'all are here for the lore, and this video has plenty to speak on. Unspoken tells the tale of how a Jackaled shield gauntlet was recovered during the Battle of Harvest, which would eventually lead to the development of Mjolnir's energy shields. Let's dive in. To start, let's establish what the lore has previously said on this subject. And the first place we'll stop is the first piece of public Halo media, Halo: The Fall of Reach. When Mjolnir was first being developed, it was certainly the most advanced battlesuit the UNSC had ever created, but one feature it lacked for decades was energy shielding. However, by 2552, the UNSC had managed to reverse engineer the shield technology of the Jackal Point Defense Gauntlet and apply it to Mjolnir. And that's about all we had for almost a decade. That Jackal shields were the key to Mjolnir's shields. And then came Halo Reach. Reach featured Spartan 3s in shielded Mjolnir, demonstrating a deviation from the established lore up to that point. We'd later learn that Mjolnir shielding was functional as of November 2551, with early suits utilizing the technology finding their way into Spartan ranks, though primarily among Spartan 3 teams like Noble. We'd also later learn that these early Mark V suits lacked a second key feature of Mjolnir Mark V, the ability to house and support a smart AI, but that's more of a tidbit than anything directly related to today's discussion. What is relevant is an item that came with copies of Halo Reach, Dr. Halsey's personal journal. Within its pages, we learn that the Jackaled shield gauntlet that led to the development of energy shields was first discovered by a graduate student, Leonard Gillespie. Sometime prior to January 10, 2536, Leonard began working with a captured Jackal shield, nothing new to the UNSC by that point. However, this model turned out to be older and, in a lucky break for the UNSC, a portion of its inner apparatus wasn't completely sealed, allowing the UNSC to study it in detail. It would take almost another 15 years, but the secret to energy shielding would be unlocked in time to make a difference in the tide of war. However, you may have noticed that a lot of details are still missing from these accounts. Where was the shield gauntlet recovered from and how? Who recovered it, and how did it end up in Leonard Gillespie's possession? Subjects like these are addressed in this first episode of the UNSC Archives. The short itself opens with a bunch of text loading into the UNSC archive. I did my best to see if there was anything of interest in there, but not much particularly stood out. The one potential Easter egg that can be found is in this text, which reads LU 2559.02.00, 2549 being the year Cortana was created. LU likely stands for logical unit, so I was generally ready to dismiss this as an Easter egg if that. But then I started looking into what logical units do. Logical units identify an end user within an SNA network, SNA standing for Systems Network Architecture. End user in this case can identify a person directly interacting with the network or an application indirectly representing such a user. Basically, it's an identification number. Given that 2559 is the year that Cortana was created, I started to wonder if perhaps this was Cortana accessing old UNSC files prior to her partnership with the Master Chief. In Halo: The Fall of Reach, we see her regularly slip in and out of UNSC systems she isn't meant to be in. But what if what we're seeing here is an authorized access sometime prior to Reach's fall? The only major problem with this idea would be the use of Gen 3 armor imagery. That could always be brushed aside as a non-canon representation for the sake of marketing, but we might have a simpler answer. Instead of Cortana accessing this sometime prior to the fall of Reach, what if this is the weapon accessing these archives to familiarize herself with Mjolnir's systems? Or Dr. Halsey accessing this for the weapon or for some other purpose? While 2549 is more of a Cortana reference, you could use it to find a connection to Halsey or the weapon, given that both have a connection to Cortana. Most likely it's just an Easter egg or coincidence, but I'd love if it turned out to be something more. Moving on though, we learned that this archive is diving into information on the development of Mjolnir's energy shields. As it loads a video file, we're told, quote, "Assigned to a freighter escaping the destruction of Harvest, 2 Marines confiscate alien energy shields while defending passengers from an enemy boarding assault. This led to a technological breakthrough that accelerated the development of the Master Chief's defense system." After that, the video loads. This video was recorded on January 17th, 2526, so 1-17 in the US system, a reference to the Master Chief's service number, aboard a UNSC medical ship. Originally, I was going to comment on its resemblance to Anchor 9, a repair and refit station featured prominently in Halo Reach. However, it turns out that this is actually Anchor 9 itself. At the top left, we can see the station's identification number, SRRS-01007, Anchor 9's ID. Seems the station can also operate, or at least operated at one time, as a medical station. Thank you once again to CIA 391 for pointing that out. Incidentally, Anchor 9 was also used as the model for the UNSC Hopeful, a medical station that was used to augment the Spartan 3s and test the augmentations for the Spartan 2s. Back on topic, we meet Lance Corporal Chris Preston, the only survivor of the 2 aforementioned Marines. Born on December 4th, 2501, Chris would have just turned 24 at the time of this recording. His UNSC uniform looks like it was designed to look similar to the naval uniforms we see in Halo Wars 2, and it features a classic UNSC logo. Details like this are more important than I can properly emphasize and are deeply appreciated when they're present. Not only are we told this is set in 2526, but we can see that based on context clues in the scene itself. Anyway, we learn that he is currently on temporary limited duty, a result of his actions on Harvest. The majority of the video is Chris recounting his actions with his fellow Marine, David Dominguez, in a video message to David's parents. We learn that the pair were ambushed by jackals during their assignment, and though they fought them off, David was killed in action and Chris's throat was damaged, leaving him unable to speak. This is why he uses sign language throughout the video and why he needs a vocal reconstruction to convey his message. Only adding to this tragedy, we learn that Chris had tried to tell David that his parents would be proud, but the damage to his throat prevented Chris from doing so. As they were being brought to Medivac, Chris passed out, awakening later to find his comrade, his friend, his brother, had passed. As the video message wraps up, Chris credits David with saving many lives through his actions, for recovering a key piece of technology, and for being the brother Chris never had. This ad was powerful, probably one of the best 343 has ever produced, and probably even on par with some of Halo 3's legendary Believe campaign. It is a fantastic first video for this UNSC Archives series. But now, let's talk about how this affects the lore. Previously, we knew that a recovered Jackal Point Defense Gauntlet had been the key to developing Mjolnir's shields. Now we know that the specific gauntlet that led to this breakthrough came from David Dominguez and Chris Preston, the former giving his life in the process. Sadly, it would be 10 years before anything came of it, and more than 20 before those discoveries could be practically applied. Nevertheless, Dave and Chris are unsung heroes of the UNSC. That all said, there are still some lingering questions that do need to be addressed at some point. First, what happened to the defense gauntlet for those first 10 years? Did it simply take 10 years for Leonard Gillespie to discover the fault with the shield, or did it get lost for a period of time before being discovered again and analyzed? Second, why were David and Chris assigned to Harvest in the first place? At first this might seem like a nonsense question, but according to the book Halo Contact Harvest, Harvest's only human military prior to the Covenant showing up were its local militia, and that was barely 2 months old at the time of Harvest's invasion. The only official UNSC presence we knew of at that time were Sergeants Avery Johnson and Nolan Byrne, Captain Ponder, and Petty Officer First Class Healy. The militia they were training were only new recruits. It's unlikely then that David and Chris were among this class. Of course, Contact Harvest really only deals with the attack on and evacuation of Utgard, Harvest's capital. Utgard was home to 200,000 people, and while the book claims the planet was only inhabited by 300,000, the Fall of Reach lists Harvest's population as 3 million. This number is again repeated in the Fall of Reach animated series and several other sources. So, Chris and David could have easily been among the rest of the colony's population, perhaps assigned to another city or region, or maybe even just in the wrong place at the right time. We can say for certainty that, at the very least, Chris and David weren't part of Admiral Cole's campaign on Harvest, That didn't start until March of 2526, 2 months after this video is set. They also weren't with any of the other ships the UNSC sent to Harvest after the colony went dark as a result of the Covenant presence. After the first Battle of Harvest, no new troops landed on the colony until Admiral Cole's 5-year campaign on the planet. These are both minor issues, however. It would be great to get these details filled in at some point, but leaving them open to speculation is fine too, especially right now. I will say though, I think that it would have been awesome if Chris and David had been part of the CMA, or Colonial Military Administration, the organization that largely oversaw military activity in the outer colonies like Harvest. But again, it's a pretty minor thing. With that, I think we can wrap up this first episode of the UNSC Archives. This was a great first episode, and I look forward to future ones. If they all turn out to be like this, emotional tales like we saw in the Believe campaign, I'd be totally on board for that. That said, I certainly wouldn't mind either if certain things were visualized. Like, if we hear the story of the UNSC's first test of Mjolnir armor again, I'd love to see aspects of that visualized in live action. But those are my thoughts for now. Share yours in the comments below. And what would you like to see from future episodes in this series? I'd love if they dove into some of the pre-Mjolnir armors a little, maybe give us some visualizations of armored exosuits that haven't been fully visualized yet. Or if they finally address the canonicity of Red Team's shields. Anyway though, thank you all again for watching as always. Stick around for the Patreon shoutout, and until next time, this has been Halo Canon. First, I'd like to give a big thank you to our Horospus patrons. First, there's Hope, then we have Freight, Discombobulated Sycophant, Justin Montgomery, Man in the Dark, Keisha Dila, Daddy Anarchy, Great Scott Productions, Jumpy Sucks Balls, and Lone Ronin 117. Thank you all for your amazing support of the channel. Next, I'd like to thank our theoretical patrons. If you'd like to see your name here or get a direct shout out, check out patreon.com/halocanon. You can simply support the channel or get additional benefits such as behind the scenes materials, including raw audio for upcoming videos, or even shoutouts like this. All patrons now get early access to certain videos as well, and more benefits are to come. However, your continued viewership is more than enough for me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and maybe even subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you really enjoy this, turn on that notification bell so you can be among the first to see new videos when they release. But for all my fellow Canonites, keep on being awesome.